Yeah, we have people from all over the world joining us. So I should say good morning and good evening and good afternoon would be the most appropriate thing. My name is Associate Professor Kelly Freebody. I'm going to be chairing this session. It's lovely to see you all and thank you for joining us. I'm going to begin with an acknowledgement of country. I am joining today from Gadigal land, from the beautiful lands of the Gadigal people. The Gadigal ancestral lands is where the University of Sydney is built. It's also where I live, and it's where I play, and it's where I raise and love my children, and I do it with deep respect for the traditional custodians of the land. And so I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the Eora Nation, past, present, and emerging, and I would like to extend that respect to all First Nations people here today. George, shall I throw to you for your acknowledgement?
Sure. So thank you, Kelly. And we, the three of us, you'll see Christina in a moment, and Tetsuro, and we'd like to acknowledge that we at the University of British Columbia are on the land of the Musqueam people, so that we acknowledge that we're on the traditional unceded territory, the traditional territory of the Musqueam, and we're grateful to play and work here and to be with all of you through Zoom.
Thanks, George. And I'd encourage everybody, I know we're all joining from all over the world in different countries today and different country in Australia. So I would encourage you to use the chat to acknowledge country if you'd like to do so. Well, welcome to this Create webinar on research-based theatre. And I'm so super excited to be introducing these scholars today. I'm going to read out three very, very, very impressive bios to introduce the three presenters from the University of British Columbia today, who all work in the research-based theatre lab at UBC. And then, Christina's just joined us. Hi, Christina. And then we'll throw to them and they're going to give their presentation, and there will be time at the end for questions. So do start to think about some questions you might like to ask them, or you can put questions in the chat and Anna will make sure that that we have time to look at them, to talk about them at the end. So welcome presenters, welcome everybody to this Create webinar. I'd like to introduce, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Christina Cook. Christina is a PhD student in counselling psychology at the University of British Columbia. She's also a registered clinical counsellor and a playwright. Her work explores mental health through inquiry and art. Her play, Quick Bright Things, was the finalist for the 2020 Governor-General's Literary Award for Drama. As a therapist, Christina specialises in working with youth and adults who are members of the Q2S plus communities. Apologies, Christina. Christina draws on her background as a professional actor and theatre artist to bring drama-based approaches to research and therapy settings. Christina currently serves as the Director of Research Projects for the research-based theatre lab at UBC. George Belliveau is a professor of theatre education in the Department of Language and Literacy Education at the University of British Columbia. His research focuses on research-based theatre, and he's worked extensively in areas of theatre and drama education and arts-based research. His latest co-edited book with Graham Lear, who I believe is joining us today as well, Contact, Unload, Military Veterans Trauma and Research-Based Theatre, explores a project with military veterans, artists and counsellors. He's a professionally trained actor and has participated in over 100 theatre productions as an actor, director, or playwright. He's a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada. Tetsuro Shigematsu is a former writer for This Hour Has 22 Minutes. He became the first person of colour to host a daily national radio program in Canada, where he became the host of The Roundup on CBC Radio. Tetsuro's theatrical solo work, Empire of the Sun, was named the best show of 2015 by the Vancouver Sun and has been touring continuously throughout Canada and beyond. It has played in 18 cities to 20,000 people. His other solo work, 1 Hour Photo, garnered 5 Jessie nominations, winning for significant artistic achievement, and was named a finalist for the 2019 Governor-General's Award for Drama. Tetsuro is currently the creative director for the research-based theatre lab at UBC. 3 incredibly impressive biographies, and we're super excited to have you here for this Create seminar. Christina, Tetsuro, and George, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Kelly, for the generous introduction and wonderful. We can't see everyone who's in the Zoom call the way it's set up here, but we're just going to imagine that we can see all your beautiful faces. We can see a few of you, thankfully. So I'm going to begin just by saying some of the goals that we're going to share with you over the next 45 minutes. And then I'm going to quickly hand it over in a moment to Tetsuro, who's going to engage you with a piece of research-based theater, which is kind of why we're kind of standing here, so that we'll be actually a little bit more embodied. So some of the goals today is that hopefully at the end of the session that you'll have an understanding of what actually research-based theater is and how you might apply it, or what context that it's been used in, and what context that you might imagine research-based theater serving the various needs of the folks that are gathered here. We want to show some examples, I think, of all the work that we do respectively in theater is about showing the work. So we'll be able to show you some of the work as best as we can through Zoom. We'll point to specific examples of the work that if you want to look it up a little bit more in detail, you'd be able to look it up either through videos or through links of articles or book chapters. And then finally, I guess it's a research methodology that's constantly evolving and emerging. So we're hoping in the discussion that people will contribute with ideas, links, connections that you've made to this methodology so that you can apply it in a variety of contexts. So those are the large kind of strands that we're hoping to reach out today. And so we'll give you a bit of background as well in terms of the lab here of some of the projects that we've done. So let's jump in with Tetsuro Shigematsu, who's going to share snippets from Empire of the Sun.
Thanks very much, George, and thank you, everyone. It's an honor to perform for you. This piece I'm about to perform for you is autobiographical, or in the words of academia, autoethnographic, and it's an excerpt from Empire of the Sun, as George just mentioned. And I feel like telling a personal story is a pretty good way to get to know someone, and in this case, as an exemplar of research-based theater. So this particular piece takes place about 3/4 of the way through a 75-minute program, show rather. And if you were to imagine behind me a kind of screen, and occasionally photos come up. Every time my father went into the hospital, it seemed less and less likely that he'd ever come out. A conference call with my sisters. How's Dad doing? Should we come? And I stopped. My sisters never asked my advice about anything. I'm the baby of the family, but here they were. Tetsuro, tell us, do we need to come? If my sisters didn't come and something happened to my dad, I would never live it down, but for some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to say it. So I said, listen closely, because I'm only gonna say this once. No one here is telling you not to come. My sisters booked their flights from all points to Vancouver, indirect flights, weird connections. And by some coincidence, they all landed within 30 minutes of each other at YVR. As they all piled into my car, everyone is giddy, literally giggling. Sure, the circumstances were crappy, but this was an impromptu family reunion. We only see each other once a year, if that, but now we're all together and everyone's so happy. At this point behind me, a photo appears from my Facebook feed, and we see a photo of myself in my car with my 3 sisters, and everyone's smiling. As I began driving toward St. Paul's Hospital, one of my sisters said to me, oh, by the way, we're not really here for Dad. Yeah, that was just the pretext. Yeah, the real reason we're here is because we decided it was high time to stage an intervention on your mustache. We're serious. We think your look is socially aggressive and aggressively antisocial. Yeah, it's really gonna limit your opportunities because you look untrustworthy, dubious, supercilious, oleaginous, unhygienic. Did I mention my sisters all scored within the top 1 percentile on their SATs? What are you talking about? This, it's a handlebar mustache. It's a classic gentleman's mustache. Yeah, well, maybe that's the look you're going for. But as an Asian, it just looks like you have two question marks on your face. Questionable look, questionable character. When my sisters say crap like that, deep down, I know they're probably right. They're always staging these interventions on me, half joking, half serious. But secretly, I was just happy not to have to talk about my father's condition. They'd see for themselves soon enough. When we got to my father's hospital room, without a word, my sisters dropped their coats and their bags, and they climbed into bed with my dad. That blew my mind. They could have levitated, and I would have been less impressed. But they lay in bed with my father, and they touched him the way daughters touch their fathers when there's a lot of love. All these hours I've been spending with my father, bringing him heated blankets, feeding him chips of ice, describing the weather outside his window. I can honestly say it never occurred to me to climb into his bed, to lay next to him, to touch him in the manner in which my brother and I express affection towards our father. We're like two characters trapped in a Frank Capra movie. My brother is a pastor, and his favorite movie is It's a Wonderful Life. And together, we're about as fulsome in our expressions of affection as Jimmy Stewart. Well, gee, Paul, just try and hang in there, will you? And hand to God, you'll be as right as rain. Our brotherly love is in black and white, but my sister's love is in technicolor and in surround sound. My sisters are multilingual in the languages of love. They coo and cluck and purr with mellifluous felicity. They speak in tongues, not because the Spirit has descended upon them, but because it never left. Make no mistake, my sisters are grown women, mothers, not matronly, maybe magicians, maybe Wiccans, because in the blink of an eye, they become little girls again, cooing, affectionate little girls. Good night, Daddy. Aishtiru. I love you. While my brother and I remain like British beefeaters, arms by our side, silent, while my sisters shapeshift into a basket full of kittens. And with every kiss, they bring him back from the brink of death. If this isn't magic, then I don't know what is. And as I stand there, slack-jawed and dumb in the corner of the room, all I can think is, there are cultures in this world that prize sons over daughters. I know, because I come from one of them. So stupid. When my father's condition stabilized, and at this point we see a photo behind me of my father looking disheveled and disoriented, and my sisters surrounding him. When my father's condition stabilized, my sisters had to go back to their regular lives, but let me tell you, their example was not lost on me. I mean, I didn't want to do it right in front of them. But as soon as they were around that corner, in that elevator, I was on that bed. Right on the edge. I leaned over. I patted my father's knee like nobody was watching. And that is a scene from my solo work, Empire of the Sun, which we hope to bring to your neck of the woods before too long. And now I'll throw things back to Dr. George Belliveau. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, well, we're talking about research-based theater, and no better example than Tetsuro's work, which was both aesthetic and also scholarly in the sense that a PhD emerged out of that work, and much more. Now I'm going to hand it over to Christina, who has really been operating in many capacities with our research-based theater lab here at UBC, in the capacity as the research manager, but also helping with the different events that we hold in terms of symposia, and also accompanying me to a number of the events where we're trying to meet partners to work with us on different projects. So Christina's going to give you a bit of a snippet on what the lab is about.
Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to be with you all on Zoom. I'm so pleased to see some familiar faces and to meet some new folks. So I get to talk to you about the Research-Based Theater Lab, and I love that excerpt that we just heard. It always gets me. And I think I'll begin talking about the Research-Based Theater Lab with that impulse of, I think many of us on this call probably have felt maybe not very at home in traditional academic environments. Just going to hazard a guess that maybe some people didn't feel like all the research methods in their introductory research course were speaking to them, like some of their peers. And maybe some people felt like, oh, you know, if there was space for something else, something more creative, something like theater, I might have a home here. And that's really what the Research-Based Theater Lab and the Research-Based Theater methodology has offered me as a graduate student. And when I think about our membership, it's wide and diverse. We have grad students, we have faculty members, we have professional artists, we have community members, and we have the wonderful hyphenated individuals who might be on this call too, who live across all those different worlds. And I think that George and Tetsuro and I are some of those individuals who walk in all these different worlds. And the Research-Based Theater Lab is a space where we can all come together and partner with faculties across the university, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary relationships, as well as community organizations. And the lab is funded by grants from UBC, as well as the federal government here in Canada. And we have missions to contribute to scholarship and the artistic forwarding of research-based theater. And we do that by creating plays, creating works that we share at conferences and in classroom spaces and community halls, untraditional theatrical spaces, but also by pushing, for lack of a better word, research-based theater scripts into academic publications, making space for theater in places where theater wouldn't normally have a space. And we have several pillars that we're committed to. One of our primary pillars is equity, diversity, inclusion, and decolonization. So we're interested in ways that we can take the academic and the theater space away from colonial practices, away from exclusionary practices, and contribute to anti-racist, anti-transphobic, all the antis that we can muster in our work together. And alongside that, we have a commitment to ethics, which is something that we talk about in university settings in a different way than theater companies talk about it or artists talk about it. And rather than thinking about those ethical boards that we all have to have perhaps tenuous relationships with, perhaps we say things about these ethical boards that we wouldn't want them to hear when we're having to fill out the applications for ethics or when we're reviewing their take on what we're proposing. We look at these ethical boards that we have to work with as partners that are creating some guidelines for us to work within, stuff that will support our creative practices, create rules that are in and of themselves productive to art making, and in some way support that. And we want to take that ethical question that is posed by the institutional ethics boards that we all know and take them even further. So research-based theater proposes all sorts of ethical questions that are not what the ethics boards are concerned about. What happens when we show works like Empire of the Sun to diverse audiences? What happens to the audiences that see it? What happens to the tech folks who are doing the sound and the lighting? What's that experience like? These are questions that ethics boards might not know to ask, but they're questions that we, as practitioners bringing together research and theater, have to ask ourselves. What's the difference of reading a published version of a script versus seeing it live? And what are the ethical implications of this? Alongside ethics, we're also interested in evaluation and assessment. And I bet we've all filled out a little survey after a theater show, a theater company wanting to know how we felt about their season choices and other things to do with the play that we just saw. We want to take our evaluation one step further. We want to really get at different people's experiences and quantify it in some ways. And the lab is invested in figuring out how to evaluate and assess research-based theater in new and innovative ways. Finally, we have a commitment to pedagogy. We want to teach. We want to pass research-based theater on and make it something that can exist outside of the lab. So we offer graduate courses every year in research-based theater as a way to pass it on. We also offer workshops, introductory workshops that are accessible and free for community members who want to get involved, who want to use this methodology and learn more about how they can use RBT, research-based theater, in their own communities. Anything we want to add about our RBT lab?
No, you've done it brilliantly.
I want to join.
Come on. Yeah, you can all join. You know, if you want to be members, just send me an email. I'll pass on the website info.
Christina makes the best newsletters.
Yeah. Great. No, I think that gives a good snippet to some of the commitments that we share, and the colleagues on our steering committee include both Christina and Tetsuro, and we have faculty members from engineering, from occupational therapy, the School of Population Health, etc. So it's quite multidisciplinary. Let's jump back into the art form. What is research-based theater in less than a minute? Research-based theater, 3 words, including a hyphen. So 2 words, research-based, meaning based on a systematic, formal research project. Theater, using an embodied aesthetic approach to share knowledge. Now, I realize that definitions can be limiting, because to do their task, they define rather than open up. Research-based theater opens up possibilities. In the intersection of research and theater, new meanings emerge, new ways of understanding unfold. Embodying research awakens the senses. It forces us to see and listen and feel differently, dwell and consider more intimately, simultaneously more broadly. Now, dramatizing data translates and extends research. It uncovers and untangles, reveals and relishes, zooms and focuses, breathing life into research. Research-based theater, 3 words, no, 2 words, 2 worlds merging into one. So that's a 1-minute version of research-based theater. Now we're going to give you a sense, because remember, one of our goals was to talk about what is research-based theater? What is it exactly? How do I fit into this? So we're trying to do it from multiple angles here, from talking about the lab to talking about giving examples. Now we're going to give you another short scene. This is what we call Intro to Research-Based Theater. And we created this scene mainly because a lot of our interested individuals across campus and the community would go, hey, we'd love to be part of RBT, but what is it exactly? So we thought, instead of talking about it, we'll show what it might be like. So I'm inviting Christina and Tetsuro again, who will share about a 7 to 8 minute scene, dramatized scene on what is RBT.
But it's only going to feel like 4 minutes because our performance is so riveting. You know, of course, this is an example of RBT, but in addition to being award-winning playwrights, Christina and I, we're also really frustrated actors. So any chance we have to demonstrate our incredible range.
Incredible.
Yes.
Incredible.
So hold on to your seats.
I'm gonna read a character called Lee, and I'm also, as an acting feat, gonna read the stage directions.
And because I have more limited skills as an actor, I'm going to limit myself to playing only one role, the role of Roman. But I think you'll agree it might be the more interesting role. But I'll let you decide.
Think about after. Lee is rehearsing an RBT monologue in an empty theater space. When I got my first placement, when I got my first practicum placement as a nurse, I couldn't believe it when I saw where I'd be going. When I got my first practicum placement as a nurse, I couldn't believe it when I saw where I'd be going.
Oh, hey, sorry. Am I interrupting?
No, come on in.
You're Lee. I wanted to introduce myself. I heard you did some kind of play at the research symposium last week. Is that right?
Oh, what did you hear?
Well, everyone was raving about Dr. Yamazaki's research, how important and relevant and vital it is. Must have been quite the show you put on.
Yes, well, I'm glad that Dr. Yamazaki's work is finally getting the attention it deserves.
I bet you must have gotten some serious funding to mount a whole show for her. It must have been really impressive. Whenever my partner and I are in New York City, we love catching a Broadway show. Phantom of the Opera, Hamilton.
Oh, yeah, what we put on wasn't really a big theater play like that. We didn't have a stage, lighting, or costumes, and no big musical numbers.
Oh, okay, so more of a campfire skit then. Is that what you did? I used to do some improv back in high school. Is that the kind of thing you do?
Not quite. It was a little more than a skit.
Oh, okay. Little more than a skit, less than a Broadway show, and it's what exactly did you do then?
It's called research-based theater.
What's that?
Well, your area of research must be really interesting.
Oh,
right?
yeah, you bet it is. I mean, my research.
I'm sure it is. But my question to you is, can you explain it to other people, non-specialists who aren't in your field?
Well, now that you mention it, at parties, my partner is always giving me the, yawning signal whenever I tell someone about my research. It isn't that my research isn't fascinating, but you have to understand that as a baseline.
Well, RBT is a way to bring your research to life in a way that captures people's attention, enabling them to better understand what you do, why it matters, in a way that they won't forget.
Research-based theater can do all of that.
Yes.
Where do I sign up?
Whoa, not so fast. RBT is not for everyone.
But you just sold it to me as this panacea for making important research seem important. Doesn't everyone want that? I mean, couldn't all researchers benefit from that?
Likely, but here's the thing. I'll try to explain it to you from the RBT, research-based theater perspective. As a group of researchers from various disciplines working alongside community members and theater artists, we work collaboratively. For instance, our team might come up with a rough sketch or a scene, and it gets passed to everyone who edit it and change it, collectively reworking things. Creative contributions in RBT don't belong to any one person.
Okay, but how does that apply to me?
Well, as a researcher, you have to be willing to take this research you've been nurturing and growing for however long and be willing to hand it off. Imagine putting your research in the hands of other people who are not experts in your field.
I don't know if I like the sound of that.
Exactly, so RBT might not be for you.
But what if I could get over that? If I was willing to take the leap and trust, what could happen?
All right, I want to show you something. I was rehearsing a monologue when you came in. It's from a research-based theater play about health professionals with disabilities and their experience at work. There it goes. Speaking as a character, Francis, from a play called Alone in the Ring. When I got my first practicum placement as a nurse, I couldn't believe it when I saw where I'd be going. A children's hospital. The same children's hospital where I spent so much time as a kid when I was being treated. One of the other practicum students asked where the bathroom was. I answered by reflex. Left of the cafeteria, past the vending machines, on your right-hand side. She asked me how I knew, and I didn't say anything. I could have told her the truth. I could have disclosed how sick I was then, but then my voice would have started shaking. My jaw would clench. I'd get dizzy. I could have told her about how much time as a child in this hospital contributed to my anxiety, the anxiety I live with now. How those memories, despite my best efforts, still have the power to take my breath away. But instead, I didn't say anything. I just walked away. I paused as I passed a wing that had big open doors full of kids, bright colors, toys, a little slide. Hey, they didn't have that when I was here, no fair. All I had was this coloring book. Well, a series of coloring books, all dinosaurs. I'd enlist the staff to help me with my creations, usually a T-Rex in 5 different shades of red. Now, I'd be the nurse. I realized that, in a way, I've become my own superhero. I went back to my colleagues. I'm more ready than I thought.
This is really different, like really new for me. But you know what? I think I get it. You're not a company trying to sell a product. You're more like the midwife who helps researchers get their message out there to a wider audience. Because researchers, we're good at what we do, but we don't necessarily always have creative ways to share it publicly. Am I right?
Actually, that's pretty close, but I'd like to add that we're really about mutual partnerships. Whether we're doing the research ourselves or working with others to tell the story of our data. Either way, we're not interested in mass production. So we have to pick and choose who we work with carefully.
Which is your way of saying you're still not sure if you want to work with me.
No, it's me saying you should really consider if RBT is right for you, because as I said before, it's not for everyone.
You know what I think? Up until now, I thought maybe this is your selling tactic. You're using reverse psychology to play coy and make me want to work with you. But I think the real reason you're so evasive is because you look at someone like me and you have no idea where to begin, right? You're trying to see if I'm prepared to wander through the wilderness with you without either of us fully knowing where or when or even how we'll arrive.
And would you be okay with that?
Well, to tell you the truth, it sounds kind of scary. Maybe?
We can work with that. Let's meet again, and you can tell me about your research.
Okay, but no yawning.
No promises.
And scene.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you both again for sharing another way of trying to introduce what is research-based theater. I thought at this point, if someone has a burning question or comments, we would just take a slight pause, and I'll let Kelly monitor this because we only want to take a few minutes, maybe 3-4 minutes, but it might be a time where someone is going to say, okay, you've been bombarding us with this. I have one clarification question. And Kelly, maybe your ears were ringing when we were talking about partnerships and the importance of partnership, which if you haven't seen the talk that Kelly gave through this very channel on partnership, it really shares a lot of that. So thanks for that, Kelly. So yeah, I'm just going to open it up at the moment before we jump to the next stages.
Does anybody have a question or a comment that they'd like to make at this point in the presentation?
I do have a quick question.
Sure.
I wonder, this is a collective question for all of you. Is it an ambition to expand the types of research that you find embodied means of transmitting as broadly as possible? Like, do you see it as something that you want to do for particular areas and particular types of research, or would a win for you look like getting people from astrophysics all the way to history of medicine?
Great question, Hannah. I can take a quick stab at this. I think a win for us is indeed that partnership where the commitment is not only for us to come in as kind of hired hands and do a documentary type piece on showing their work, but a win is when they are partners, whether it's astrophysics or gerontology or engineering, is that they want to learn about the art form of theater and the affordances of it, and that we come together in a more transdisciplinary way. So, of course, broadening it and to be able to say, hey, we worked across all these disciplines is a bit of a win. But I think the real win is when there's this really mutual weaving of our respective disciplines so that we are learning tons about that particular area, and reciprocally, they are learning about the affordances and the possibilities of theater.
Thanks, Anna. George, can I actually follow up on that question then with a sort of, I guess, a practical methodological question? Do you guys, do the three of you envisage RBT as something that, as a methodology, comes at the beginning, in the sense of, if you're working with a researcher, research-based theatre is part of the methodology from the beginning of the process? Or is it possible to consider it as sort of a way of presenting data, even if it hasn't been involved in the collection as a sort of a methodological framework or philosophy? Does that make sense as a question?
It does. Great question. And the three examples we're going to give after this brief, hopefully we'll address that a little bit directly. But do you want to have a go at that question? I think we can all respond to it. But
yeah, I think it's a really great question, Kelly. I think that the methodology that we share with folks is meant to be versatile enough that people can bring it in at different phases in their own research project. And we definitely have seen that in the groups that we've worked with across the university. So some folks come with data already collected, they've done qualitative interviews, and they've even maybe published a little bit of those in a more traditional kind of way, a thematic analysis or something like that. And they want to find a way to exchange the knowledge that they've created and they've discovered and co-collaborated with their participants in a different form, in an artistic form. And then we can help them translate that already collected data into a theatrical form. But we've also worked with groups that have reached out from the very beginning of the process and didn't really have a sense of what they wanted their research project to even look like. And so research-based theater offered, even before applying for ethics, a way to just explore the relationships on the research team, relationships with community members, and a way of actually investigating what a research question might be, or a stance of research inquiry. So I think we try to be flexible and bring people in at whatever stage. And we found that those folks that approach us to use theater after they've already collected their interview data, and I think that's something we're all familiar with. You can turn transcripts into a monologue. That's not, that's not that hard to do. Often sometimes they often leap off the page. But we find that people who do that then have come back to us and want theater from the very beginning of their process. So we're also interested in how this very flexible approach can create long-term relationships with people from different disciplines.
Great. Thanks, Christina. That's great. We have time, just the group, we have time for one more quick question now, if somebody has one or a comment that they'd like to make. We'll also have plenty of time, hopefully, at the end to answer any questions or give the opportunity for people to talk as well. Thanks, everyone.
We'll continue with the program.
Great. Okay, thanks. So the next, what we're going to spend maybe 5 or 6 minutes, we'll commit to. I'm trying to show examples of research-based theater to give you a bit of a taste. And all of these projects, as I mentioned, either there are videos of them and or publications of them. And we're trying to choose 3 of them that have a bit of a spectrum in terms of really following up on Kelly's question, that whether they were projects that began at kind of the initial data collection, or was it part of the analysis, or was it part of the knowledge mobilization. And so all 3 projects kind of touch on different areas of them. So Tetsuro, a moment ago, you saw Empire of the Sun. We don't need to begin in this order. Do you want to begin in the, we'll ask Tetsuro just to talk a little bit about how was that piece created and how does it fit into research-based theater. And then Graham Lee is on the call as well. So I'm going to call on Graham. We're going to talk a little bit about a project called Contact Unload with military veterans, which had quite a long life and had used research-based theater. And then Christina's going to come back on and talk about a more recent project with biological and engineering around water called Treading Water. So we'll give you at least 3 kind of entry points of particular projects, and then we'll move into another discussion. So maybe Tetsuro, you can give a little bit of a background in terms of some of how RBT became part of your piece and what stages, and I'll leave it at that.
Terrific. Well, I self-identified prior to my my time as an academic, as a theater artist, and a question I often get from fellow theater artists who are considering, oh, what's it like to create theater within the academy versus the so-called professional world. And something I often emphasize, if they're interested in research-based theater or doing theater within the academy, is the primacy placed upon ethics. And at this point, a fellow artist tends to get a scowl on their face and think, oh, that sounds like it would really cramp my style. No, thank you. And that's sort of the end of the discussion. Of course, ethics is not exclusive to research-based theater methodologies, but across the spectrum of academic endeavors. But I think one of the things, as someone who makes plays, one of the things that distinguishes research-based theater as a methodology versus other forms of playwright-driven creation methods or devising is the systematic deployment of, is how systematic the research is. And so in regards to Empire of the Sun, if I were to have made that show within a different context outside of doing my PhD, I may have used a combination of memory, talking with my siblings, and then using a fair amount of poetic license, I think. Whereas I think the constraints of research-based theater, everything from having to ask for permissions, specifically from my father, the interviews that I conducted, as well as I think, and in this case, it's more of an aesthetic choice than a methodological one, it's my adherence to the things that had happened and the recognition that I didn't really have to make up a whole lot in order to make this show. These were some of the aesthetic characteristics that emerged in terms of the creation of Empire of the Sun. Now, research-based theater exists a kind of spectrum, if you will, and oftentimes research-based theater shows or plays are often for stakeholder audiences. So perhaps it's maybe shown within an academic setting or other researchers who might be interested in the topic or interested in the methodology, or conversely, it may be shared with the stakeholders of the community that we happen to be engaged with. Maybe a marginalized community wants some assistance in terms of telling their particular stories, and so it can be in and around the community. Empire of the Sun is a little bit of an outlier in the sense that the show was intended for and continues to be largely for mainstream public audiences. And I think it's, to be frank, it's lost on them that it employs this particular methodology. They see it as this is a particular evening of theater, but during Q&A and talkbacks, if audience members do in fact detect that there's something a little bit different, if they see the whole 75-minute show about this approach to storytelling, this approach to capturing oral histories, this approach to talking with family members. And at that point, I will, if they're interested, include them into some of the constraints and the affordances of RBT as a methodology. So yeah, Empire of the Sun is just one example for me in terms of how very flexible and versatile this RBT as a methodology, in that it can be used by professional theater artists, but also researchers, community members, anyone who identifies as intersectional or marginalized. And it's a way of sharing research that goes beyond knowledge mobilization, but enables people to pose questions that they're thinking about and portray those stories of the communities that we're trying to reflect in ways that are vivid and hopefully unforgettable, which is, I think, what the best theater always does. So I think I'll just leave it there.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Tetsuro. So as Tetsuro's talking about Empire of the Sun, a solo work really meant for a public, more of a public audience. I'm going to ask if Graham Lee can get his camera on as well. We can't see all the participants, so Graham and I were part of a project called Contact Unload, which was working with military veterans who are transitioning to civilian life. A very parallel program was taking place in Brisbane with our great colleague Michael Balfour and Linda Hassel. Similar project in Canada, working with counseling psychologists and military veterans as our participants. So maybe the contrast of this example is that we started collecting the data with the veterans in terms of interviews, formal and other ways of collecting data through drama-based activities, really process drama activities. We were playing, role-playing in the space, while Graham, as the playwright, was scribing really what was happening in the space, both physically and orally, so that he could then try to compile all this. So the data was done through a drama process. And of course, Graham's approach to the playwriting was a form of analysis through the playwriting in terms of what are the major themes that are coming up from the veterans. And then the last stage, the knowledge mobilization, was in the form of a play. But different, again, from Tetsuro, we had artists in the mix, but really at the forefront was the participants who were non-theater artists. I'll just pause there, Grant, if you want to jump in.
What else can I add to that? So George talked about the data generation process happening. A lot of that was theatrical, and I can remember very clearly sitting within the room and watching George work through some theater activities. And for instance, a tableau might then influence the creation of a scene or the creation of a particular moment. We were also working in the theater development took place in an artist's studio. The artist Foster Eastman was also working on the project. And so some of the influences of his studio and the work that he was doing on the project then became woven into the piece. In terms of other elements of data generation, data analysis, so one of the challenges that we were presented with by the veterans is, and forgive the language, but I cannot help but quote one of our veterans: "I don't want my story turned into war porn. I don't want it there for a vicarious release for the audience." And so for myself as a playwright, how do you try to create a piece that allows the audience members in ways to connect to these very difficult experiences that are well beyond the scope of many people in the audience? And so that it became not just using the data from that from the data or from the theater development workshops, but including things that were going through in my own personal experience at that particular time. And so I was able to bring some of that in and try to find ways to connect to audiences, in this case through breath. So for instance, there would be a story about a One veteran watching a colleague die, and I had taken the story, and some of it was verbatim, but I added a number of pieces around feeling the breath change, because that's something that many people can connect to, watching someone or something they care for start to stop breathing. And so pulling that out of the vicariousness and finding points of connection for an audience. Anything else, George, that you were looking for?
No, not looking for anything in particular. Thanks, Graham, for sharing, because as Graham is talking about, a lot of research-based theater, we tread that fine line between being artists who our sensitivities come in because we want to connect with the moment, but also finding that distance, because at the end of the day is that we're working in partnership. But to deny who we are as human beings, as artists, within the research project, if we deny that, then we're not fully committed sometimes in ways that will move the work forward. So I think Graham gives an example there from a personal perspective. I mean, Contact Unload had many layers, and because it was based in counseling psychology as well, we wanted to also highlight our colleague Marv Westwood's approach to working with counseling. And in many ways, Marv has been doing this work along with other colleagues, but the theater piece, I think, lifted the possibilities of the work and made it public of something that's very private. And the same for the veterans. Their stories that they were holding on to were in some ways, very private stories. And of course, with their permission, and what Christina talked about with ethics, and Tetsuro talked about ethics, we went through many iterations that their permission was always first. And at times with the Veterans Project, we had to pull some scenes out, or we had to change things because the veterans at that point were not comfortable. And of course, as many of you do that are on the call here, we try, when we collect difficult stories, we don't necessarily ask people to replay them so that their trauma is replayed. Often we would ask another veteran to play, and it was more combined characters, or what's the other word? It's when you bring a bunch of characters together, it's composite characters, so that there be no re-traumatization. The last thing I'll say too is that because we had a large team on that project of researchers, when Christina talked about evaluation and assessment, we had the luxury of trying to build in some of that assessment, so that it was not only on audience assessment, but on performer assessment, on the artists, on the counselors, so that we could really get a pulse on evaluation and what does a project like this mean, so we could respond to our major funder, which was Movember, in our case, Movember Canada. Although Australians, we had Movember Australia also participate and actually partly fund the project. I'll stop there just so that we get one last kind of in-between project that has the artistic bent of Tetsuro's and the more community bent that Graham and I talked about, mainly with non-theater artists. And so Christina's just going to talk about a project called Treading Water.
Yeah, so Treading Water is a script that we worked on starting in 2019. And this script focuses on a challenge that Indigenous and remote communities have here in Canada in terms of accessing clean drinking water. Many of these communities are facing water advisories and have been facing water advisories for decades. So this is a long-standing issue that has defied a lot of different interventions that have been put in place to try to address it. And we teamed up and were approached by folks from researchers here at UBC, engineers who were working with water operators in remote communities, trying to come up with different solutions. And these engineers had recognized that there were several different groups that had stakes. The government had stakes in this issue, water operators had stakes in these issues, and of course the community members in these communities had a huge stake in these issues, and there was misunderstandings between their experiences and across their experiences. The water operators themselves were often community members, but faced criticism from communities because they were held responsible for the fact that the water was still not clean, still not accessible for folks. So our task was to create a play that in some way spoke to the experiences of all of these different groups. And this is an example where the group approached us and wanted us to create a play, and they didn't really want to take part in creating the play. They wanted us to create the play. So we went to water operator conferences and talked to water operators. We talked to the researchers themselves. We talked to folks from the community, and we created a script on a retreat. We went on a retreat for a couple of days, and theater artists came up with a script. We shared it with these groups, got feedback, adjusted the script, and continued in this kind of iterative process where we were creating this piece apart from them and seeking their approval, seeking their insights into how we could change it to really capture their stories. And in the end, we've shared that piece at water operator conferences, and we've done that in conferences locally and nationally, and had audiences made up of water operators and researchers and government officials. And all of those folks have engaged us in conversations after the performances, often one-on-one conversations where they share about their own experiences. And that's perhaps one of the most remarkable things. I think that we maybe, many of us have experienced how when we perform theater, when we share stories, other people are given permission to share stories, and those precious moments after we share our pieces, when people give us their own personal stories one-on-one and feel like they have permission to speak it out now. So we're continuing to develop that piece and move it forward and looking for other places we can perform it.
Great. So I'm realizing we're reaching the hour. If Michael Anderson would have been here, Michael actually was part of one of the workshops that when we were really in the early stages working in one of the spaces, and Peter O'Connor were visiting Vancouver, and as we were one of the iterations of the Treading Water. So really, I want to leave you with a few questions, and then hopefully we'll open up to some questions. Some of the learnings that we've had along the way with the lab is, who do we work with? Like some of the questions that were asked in that short scene, you saw Roman and Lee, and how do we make decisions? And of course, as all of you who are on this call, you end up like there's something that just says, okay, this is going to be a good collaboration, or it's convenient, or so we're always trying to unpack what are good collaborations. And I've found in my years of working with this, it's not always the funding. The funding is a key thing to move things forward, but that is not the most important part. Yet, if grad students are going to work on projects and artists, we need funding. We can't have people working for free. Faculty members, like myself, can give our time, and like other faculty members here, but that is always a key question. And getting everyone involved in it has been a key factor. What Christina just mentioned earlier is critical to something we've learned, is that for us, we can generate a scene or we can generate a play, but if we also want it to be really this neutral relationship. But it becomes sometimes love and hate, right? Because sometimes the researchers are in the room and their language towards readjusting the scene is different than the language in a theater space where it's yes and. Sometimes it's like, no, that doesn't work. And then for a sensitive artist sometimes. So all of that, we try to pre-think all that, but then of course we don't want to be all in our heads because then we're no longer artists. But those are some of the key learnings as well with the lab. The last thing I'll say is that the lab, we've been often working with community partners and in collaboration. Now we're trying to take a pause and go, how can we develop the methodology further? How can we as a lab advance our methodology, be more nimble, be really ready in the space to then work with partners? Because if we don't take our own time, kind of that mental health time, to retweak our own skills and really kind of ground our methodology, we're always in service of, so that's been a great learning and a luxury to have space and wonderful colleagues to work with so that we can keep honing the methodology. So I'll pause there as I promised so that we have time for questions, and hand it back to Kelly and Anna to facilitate the next stage.
Thank you so much, George, Tetsuro, and Christina. That was such a fascinating and well-planned and engaging and thoughtful presentation, and I'm sure that everybody got heaps from it. I've got pages of notes here already. I open up to the floor. Would anybody like to ask a question? Yes, please, Shell.
Sorry, got to unmute. Thank you so much, everyone, for a really engaging and insightful presentation. George, just picking up on your recent comment here at the end, where you said we can't have people working for free. I have been running into some issues in paying my performers who are not necessarily trained actors. So I use the people who can act but are from the same profession as those that are being represented, that I got the data from. And I've just run into some sort of a few walls in being able to generate some funding. So any advice would be much appreciated there on how you seek funding, where you approach. Like, I was interested to hear that Movember, you received some funding from Movember. So is that probably more likely that you would get funding from outside sort of research funding? Sense.
Well, I think there's maybe other people in the room that can respond to this. The funding resources are sometimes project dependent. So the Movember, because it was a men's health project, that was where they wanted to put some of their resources. Movember has put a lot of money in prostate cancer, and they were realizing that we want to keep saving lives of, in this case, men who often get prostate cancer, but they were also looking at the mental health. So we tapped into it at a time where we were fortunate. In terms of trying to find funding for, in this case, if they're non-actors, there's it can be sometimes difficult, because to make the argument sometimes is it's going to depend on how much funding you have. Sometimes it's maybe not monetary also. I guess would be the first thought. I thought, well, depending, sometimes we get participants working on that they can do it as an independent study, because then it works into their programs. And so ways, and then you as an instructor or a faculty member has to get out of the, you got to make sure that you can do an independent study and do that, the legwork. But so the compensation sometimes might be in a different form, or it might be opportunities that you give them if you can't quite fit them underneath the grant that you have or the grants that you're seeking.
Can I follow up on Shell's question there just quickly, George, or Christina or Tetsuro? In terms of, if you were going to go for grant funding for an established sort of grant body, do you lead with the RBT sort of approach as your methodology? Or, I mean, I'm just thinking about writing for audiences that don't understand this work necessarily or have never heard of it before. So in your, like, if you were going to go for funding for, the Canadian Research Council or something like that, where there would be people reading your grant applications from lots of different sorts of industries that might have more traditional ideas about what methodology is, how do you present the work?
That's a great question, Kelly. And I would imagine that the ARC, I think it's the Australian Research Council, and our equivalent, it faces the same. Yeah, the readers of that may not be arts-based researchers, let alone theater researchers, let alone research-based theater. So lots of levels. I think we're in a luxury a little bit in Canada, that we've had a lot of arts-based researchers in other disciplines like visual arts and music, who've kind of put the methodology, their method, the arts-based methodology first, and not to make it second to get funding. Let's say you're doing a bullying project. They're going to say it's all about the bullying research, and then we're going to integrate the arts-based approach. I think we're on the shoulders of enough clearly evidenced work that is using arts-based, so we can play with that a little bit. But I have to say that most of the grants that I've been part of, it's usually the research-based theater is there to support another kind of content. To go forward just with the research-based theater, Internally, UBC has been fortunately has seen it as this kind of shining light as a possibility because they see it as an interdisciplinary nexus. But our national funding bodies, we could get the small grants. Graham was on this call. We did get a recent small grant to get a connections, but we're talking about pocket change grants as opposed to the biggies that we're partnering with, like the engineering one that we're part of we're talking about multi-million-dollar grants. So to bring us in is possible, but to be at the forefront. However, more of us sitting on those committees, which is actually very helpful because then your voice is represented on those research councils.
Oh, I think, and the more demonstrations we have of successful projects and successful work that have used it, the more we can lead with that and that idea. But thanks, George. Does anyone else in the Zoom room have a question for the team or a comment they'd like to make?
It's good to see some familiar faces. I'm seeing a few people now because the screen is changing.
Kate, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Hello everyone from
Kate.
Vancouver. Lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for that. I'm interested in what analysis or what you've done in terms of what individuals take away. Have you done anything along those lines in terms of either a participant or an audience member? What do people take away from research-based theatre in terms of changing their perceptions or creating new knowledge? Have you done anything like that?
Do you want to speak to maybe Alone in the Ring? Or?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And it's something that we're so interested in exploring. And I think we've done that with two of our projects in particular, Contact Unload, which George was speaking about earlier and Graham was speaking about, and also Alone in the Ring, which is the project that I kind of referenced a little bit. It was the monologue that I did in the scene, the meta experience that y'all had. I was playing another character in a scene, playing a character. That is from a play called Alone in the Ring, which is based on the experiences of healthcare professionals who identify as having a disability. And so the team behind that has been doing that play for probably 3 years now for students and been doing a lot of post and pre-surveys based on people's reactions to working with a clinician who has a disability, either a visible disability or discloses that they have a disability, or working with a student who has a disability, either visible or discloses that they do. So they ask the same questions before and after the performance, and they just get people's reactions to some scenarios based around what the play is focused on. And they've been collecting that data to track whether or not the play is impacting people's experiences of talking about disability in this way, experiences of stigma. And they've been seeing that there is a lot of change for folks in the post-performance surveys that they've been tracking in terms of their awareness of different issues surrounding disability and their willingness to engage in activism or acts of allyship. So I think that idea that Alone in the Ring, that team is creating of a pre and post survey for all of the audience members, it works because they're showing it to students. So the students, they have to be there before and after the play. They can take a pre and post survey. So I think thinking about that and different ways that we can bring that into other projects that we're working on, even in community spaces where people might not show up early and they might not stay after, figuring out different ways we can engage with that format is really compelling to us right now.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. Any other questions or comments that people would like to make?
I've got a quick one. Sorry, I came at the tail end of that. I got my time difference wrong. I was listening to something else that was also in Canada, so I had to choose between the two. So I assume this will be on your YouTube Create Online thing?
Yes, we'll put a recording up soon.
Yeah, that's all right. That's fine. I'll follow it up then. Excellent. Thanks for having it. I'm sorry. I just got so out of whack with the times.
That's all right. No, it's all good.
Right. I'll watch it another time. Thank you.
It'll be up there in a couple of days, I think.
Yeah, that's fine. No rush.
Anyone else that has a question?
Yeah, don't have much on today, so I might be able to get it up this afternoon, but I'm about to put, just for everyone, I'm going to put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat now, so you can save it from there.
Thank you.
Kelly, you must have a comment or
I do. I have a question. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't hogging the question time, because I have the privilege of choosing who gets to ask them. I do have a question, and it's it's something that all of you touched on, and I guess in some ways you've gone away to answering it, but I'm just thinking about people that will watch this recording, and I know that a lot of graduate students, a lot of my PhD students kind of that are thinking about doing arts-based research and research-based theatre have to think about this. That you talked about the fine line, George, and everybody kind of talked about what it meant to both Christina and Tetsuro were talking about ethics. And I was kind of thinking about there's the practical institution-based ethics of getting permissions and things like that. But then there's the research ethics of telling stories, of kind of a piece of work that needs to tell a story, but also needs to have a relationship with truth or trustworthiness in a way that makes it research, in a way that we would consider research to have that, and also makes connections with audience. And so we talk about the fine line, George, you were talking about artists and research, but also distance and presence. And I'm wondering whether you just have some advice of how people that are starting this kind of work, particularly if they're used to working either solely in theatre, where there is much more artistic license and the art is the thing, compared to all people that are coming from research, where it's always been very much about triangulation, trustworthiness, sort of research ethics, and a representation of some kind of truth, however that might be understood in the methodology. What are some principles for approaching that fine line that you might have?
I'm happy to take a stab at it, but Tetsuro, if you've got something that's brewing.
Yeah, I think I can speak primarily from the artistic point of view. I think for early career artists, something that artists often valorize is creative freedom and how they prize that above all. But I think the further along one becomes in their artistic practice, there is a renewed appreciation for limitations. And it's an oft repeated adage that the absence of limitations is the enemy of art or creativity. So I'd say my advice for the artist who is considering working within the context of the academy or RBT or within the strictures of ethics is it will be much harder, without a doubt. But I think the resulting work is much more resonant. Specifically, in my case, I had to ask permission from my father to tell his story. And 20 years prior, I was doing a kind of prequel to the show called Rising Sun. He essentially told me to stop. My mother took me aside one day and says, "Oh, by the way, when Dad tells people about you, Dad says, my son makes fun of my accent for a living." And so I asked my mother, is that Dad's way of saying, yeah, I know he has a dark sense of humor, but does he really mind? And she said, "I'm not sure. But the subtext of that was that you need to stop." And so I did stop for a really long time. When I finally summoned the nerve about 5 years into my PhD, all my fellowship funding had run out, and I finally summoned the nerve to ask the question, do I have your permission, Dad? He immediately said yes. And that was a surprise to me because he didn't want me to perform his story earlier. He died shortly after, about 2 weeks before the show premiered. But I feel like even just as a performer, I've heard it said within the context of creative writing, there's no great writing without great betrayal. And Anne-Marie Lamott once tweeted something to the effect of, tell your stories. If people wanted you to write nicely about them, they should have treated you better. And this sort of call to arms breaking of silence, I think it can be quite empowering for those who feel marginalized or feel silenced to find their voice. But I think working within the context of academia and as artists at a certain level, we have to value intersubjectivity. Like what are the story? How can we tell stories in ways that have multiple points of view? And so for me, just as a performer, like I don't believe I'll ever see my father again when I play him on stage, but knowing that I have asked for his permission and he said yes, knowing that I have his blessing, I feel like as a performer, I can channel his spirit with a level of abandon rather than having that twinge of compunction, thinking like, I'm not sure if this is okay. It feels a little bit shady. So in that respect, I would say as an artist should really dive in and really embrace all the constraints and the challenges of research-based methodology, of all the ethical precepts. And the resulting work, the journey will be that much more challenging, but I'm a firm believer that the resulting piece will be that much more resonant on an aesthetic level.
I'll just add to that I think the luxury of some of the research-based theater pieces we've talked about have gone through different iterations. And Kelly, I think some of them initially were more one-to-one, showing the research, the trustworthiness, as you talked about. But as the partnership developed and the trust in the artistic, then the nuances of the artistic form starts to evolve and emerge. But that is a luxury, right? To have not only just a one-off project, but projects that have several iterations. Christina mentioned Alone in the Ring, which it is pushing 3 or 4 years to 40 different presentations, 40 presentations, but several different versions of the script. And same as Contact Unload, it had different versions of it. And so it waxes and wanes between the artistic and the research. Yet that dance is where we need to always keep it, because if it takes over, that it just becomes a performance as opposed to honoring the research, then you're doing something different, which is wonderful. Or if you're only showing the research and no art, again, you're doing something different. And there's another Kelly on the call too.
Yeah.
Or do Kel do go by Kel? And I know it was that does RBT work. So I was signaling to both of you.
Kel, do you have a question?
I don't think so. I like Natasha came in a little bit late, so I'll have to kind of go back and watch to see the bits that I missed. I guess I guess my question with RBT work is always around kind of intentionality and around when we're thinking about talking to audiences and assessing and evaluating and it's we can ask questions like, did it resonate with you? What moments resonated with you? And find out whether or not it was a success in terms of it landing. But I guess my question is always, then what? Then what? That's the bit that I'm always curious about. And I guess, so it's more a comment, I guess, than a question. That's my question that I always have around RBT. And I wonder if anyone wants to comment on the comment or ask a question. But yeah, I guess that's just always my question. Yeah.
Well, that question really resonates with one of our PhD students here, Jenica Nichols, who is asking that very question, is that, okay, it lands, and then what are you going to do about it? Like the projects we've been talking about, it's great that water is going to be coming in small communities and that we're going to really start to understand what it means to live with a disability and working in healthcare. Yet what is next? What is the next step? And I think sometimes that's beyond what we can do as kind of artist researchers, because it's not activism, but it's a sense of like promotion of that particular field, of how can they then bring it inside that field. Yet I think that is the partnerships that we need to keep building is that it's not only activating people, it's actually activating them into action. And so I think that's a great question. If we're not asking that question, we haven't really explored the possibilities of our field.
Anyone else for one last question? All right, well, I will let our presenters rest. Thank you so much. Create is so appreciative. And everybody joining us, make sure that you check your inboxes, because we will have exciting news about the potential for an Australian visit from the UBC research-based theatre team to come and do some work with us, hopefully early next year in February. And we'll hopefully be sending that out in the next few days, which would just be so wonderful. To all be in a room together. So do keep an eye out for that. Tetsuro, Christina, George, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a rich and wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Kelly, for being a great host, and Anna for organizing us, and for all of you, take the time out of your morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
So good to see
Bye.
you.